I'm Jill, Chief Safety Officer with Vivid Learning Systems. I'm a former OSHA inspector, and I'm here to help you identify and correct workplace safety hazards. For this series, we're at the University of Louisville in beautiful Kentucky to show you no matter where you work, safety is for everyone. Researchers and scientists spend their days in labs. But not all labs are the same. In fact, there are 4 different levels called biological safety levels of labs. Today we're at the University of Louisville at the dental school, and I am with Rachel Carey. Rachel is a lab safety training specialist. And Rachel, we're standing in front of a level 2, is it,
Correct.
Type of lab? So can you tell us about these different levels? What are they?
Sure. Biosafety levels are a set of biocontainment precautions that are put in place to isolate potentially dangerous biohazards from escaping the lab environment.
Okay, very good. What is the process that you go through to determine these levels?
Well, we would start with a risk assessment. Typically, the first thing to take into consideration when doing a risk assessment is the materials that you're going to be working with. There is fortunately a database of risk groups that are associated with various biohazardous materials that you would work with. And these risk groups have a 1 through 4 system similar to the biosafety level 1 through 4. And they often correspond, but not always. So another part of your risk assessment is going to be to take into consideration how you're going to be manipulating the material.
And so determining the risk level takes into effect two different aspects of the risk assessment, rather.
Yeah.
So you have the level itself and then the risk group, and so they're not the same.
And more things too, like maybe the health of your employees. Does anyone have a compromised immune system? So there are a lot of factors that can play into doing a thorough risk assessment.
And so what kind of work activity would happen in some of the different levels?
Well, biosafety level 1 lab, for example, would be appropriate for use with materials or biological agents that wouldn't necessarily pose a risk to human, plant, or animal health. Okay. Something like a non-pathogenic E. coli strain, for example.
Okay.
Now, when you start to move up and work with materials that come with a higher potential risk, you want to work with them at higher biosafety levels. So a pathogenic E. coli strain, for example, you'd want to work with at a biosafety level 2.
Okay.
That also would apply for HIV or hepatitis B. These are agents that cause disease for which we have treatments. And another important aspect of that is they're not transmitted via the air, so via the inhalation route or through aerosolization.
Okay.
And so all of these things we take into consideration when determining what biosafety level to use for different agents that we work with.
So it's really critical for employee safety to know which level you need for the work that you're going to be doing.
Exactly, and typically a lab that you work in is pre-designated, and the most important things for the employees or any personnel at that point is then to understand the practices that they need to put in place to safely work at that biosafety level.
Rachel, what are the special personal protective equipment considerations with each of these levels?
So for any of our lab work, we ask that any personnel wear lab coat and gloves. At biosafety level 1, you would follow what's called standard microbiological practices, which would include things like washing your hands before and after commencing work. Okay. Also, no eating or drinking in lab and basic things like that. When we move from a BSL 1 to a BSL 2 lab, we start putting more safety measures in place, such as an autoclave. And we start providing more training to the employees. And as we escalate to level 3, we add in more PPE and more security. And then finally the highest level, BSL 4, which we do not do BSL 4 work at this institution. But it would have the highest level of security and safety precautions.
Is there special ventilation with the area itself as well with some of the levels?
Not at biosafety level 1 and 2, but when we get into biosafety level 3 here at our organization, We do have airflow systems in place that create positive pressure within the laboratories, and what that does is it prevents any materials that could be in the air from escaping the lab. And that is one characteristic that we can see in the materials that are worked with at Biosafety Levels 3 and 4, is that they have the potential to be airborne.
Okay, and so you want to protect the entire space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all of that air that is exhausted out of the room is, in our organization at least, passed through a HEPA filter before exhausting.
So Rachel, what are some do's and don'ts that you'd want to make sure people aren't doing or are doing in these different levels?
Sure, and a lot of that would be personal practices, including PPE. So it starts from the very basic level, which would just be establishing good habits of washing your hands and cleaning up spills, and then at the higher levels, we would ask people to wear additional PPE. For example, our BSL 3 labs, we have our personnel wear 2 pairs of gloves. We have our personnel wear respiratory protection devices, wear fluid impervious gowns, and these all just become a part of your work routine when you work at different levels.
Very good. Rachel, thank you so much for sharing this valuable information and your expertise in this area. So if you have labs in your workplace, maybe you could start by asking, when was the last time we did our risk assessment, or how did we do our risk assessment, to ensure that you have the right level for the type of work activity that you're doing in your work environment. I hope you gained a safety skill today. If you know someone who needs this, go ahead and pass it on. Safety is everyone's business.